Hi, and welcome to the Purser's Diary Part 1. My name is Martin, and in this series I'm going to talk about a diary, or rather two diaries, that were kept by my grandmother's grandparents as they sailed around the world on a sailing ship called the Ida Zeigler in the 1860s. Their names were Charles Alfred Green, or Alfred, and Eliza Green, his wife, and this is their story. Alfred was the purser, a kind of on-board shopkeeper and one of the officers on board the Ida Zeigler. He kept the first diary during the voyage from 1866 to 67, and his wife Eliza kept the second diary from 1867 to 1868. The diary gives us a rare glimpse of life at sea for ordinary folk sailing in the Victorian era. There were no radios, no weather forecasts, no engines, no GPS, no sat-nav. For historical context, the American Civil War had only just ended. So what kind of ship was the Ida Zeigler? If you've ever visited the Cuddy Sark and the Greenwich Maritime Museum, you get a very good idea because they're very similar ships. The Cuddy Sark was launched in Dumbarton, Scotland in 1869. The Ida Zeigler was launched from Bremerhaven in Germany in 1857, just 12 years earlier. The Ida Zeigler weighed 860 tons and the Cuddy Sark 963, so they were very similar size. Both ships had 3 masts but no engine, making them entirely dependent on the wind in their sails to push them towards their various destinations. The Cuddy Sark survives as a relic of seafaring in that era, but the Ida Zeigler was wrecked off Napier in New Zealand in 1869. The diaries don't provide the details of everybody on board, so it's difficult to estimate how many people there were. When she left Auckland, the diary notes that there were 70 passengers. So if we estimate maybe 20 sailing crew, plus officers, cooks, stewards and a doctor, we get to maybe 100 people, perhaps a little more. An important question to ask is why the diary was written. I wonder if there was some kind of family deal involved. If Alfred and Eliza got into some negotiations. She was the daughter of a merchant sea captain who was lost at sea, and I wonder if she said to him, "You keep the diary for the first voyage, I'll join you for the second, and we'll see how we go. And if it gets too hairy or too dangerous, we're going to give up our life at sea and take up a safer occupation on land." Alfred did actually give up his life at sea in 1868 to open a bakery in Twickenham. The physical diary is in a poor state, looking like it's been opened by many hands and suffering the consequences. In later years, it got neglected and was consigned to the back of a cupboard in my mother's house where I found it a couple of years ago. In the intervening time, all sorts of myths and speculations grew up around the diary, wondering what Alfred was up to in the Southern Pacific. Was he up to some kind of blackbirding, which was a slave trade operating in the South Pacific after the British Empire had abolished slavery in 1834? Part of my motivation to reopen the diary was to see if there are any skeletons in the cupboard, quite literally. Fortunately, I didn't find anything like that. But what I found was much more interesting, because it had to do with the lives of ordinary people, and what they got up to on a day-to-day basis, and how they found life at sea. That I found was far more interesting. Before we get to the diary itself, I must acknowledge all the resources posted online by the museums of New Zealand. It seems that the New Zealanders of European descent love to find out how their ancestors got there back in the day, so there's plenty of newspaper articles, ledgers and accounts that I could use to cross-reference and check and fill in some of the details of some of the joint voyages. One account that stood out was the account of Charles Alexander Mitchie, who was a young lad on the 1867 voyage. We'll come back to him later, but he gave a lot of interesting detail about that particular voyage. Alfred opens his diary as the Ida Zeigler leaves London in July 1866. Most of his and Eliza's entries are written at the close of each day, but this entry and a few others catch up on the previous few days. Alfred writes,
"Joined the Ida 11th July, Wednesday, went home to Fisher's Gate by express to ship Monday morning. 16th July, hauled out of the East India docks and towed as far as Gravesend, and laid there till Tuesday evening, and a steamer towed as far as the North Foreland. Steamer took us in tow again at Godwin, and towed till 9, when we had a fine fair breeze, and was off the Isle of Wight at 11 o'clock at night. Passed Fisher's Gate at 6:30.
Incidentally, We're not going to read every entry, which would take much too long. We'll pick and choose which entries are of most interest, although we'll keep them in chronological order because, like them, we're not going to know what's going to happen the next day. From the outset, we can see that this is not a formal account of the voyage. There would have been ship's logs and ledgers and accounts to do that. No, Alfred wrote his diary so that he could read it to his family upon his return to Brighton in England. One can imagine his family around the dinner table when he got back saying, "Well, how did it go? What did you do? What did you find out? Tell us about your voyage." Fisher's Gate was the family's home address. I can well imagine Alfred standing on deck and looking out wistfully in that direction at that time, or at least he wanted his family to think he did. The family's residence still stands, if I've got the address right, and according to Google Street View. It looks like a modest Victorian tenement, and the Greens would have rented a floor or perhaps some rooms in it. They were not rich, but rather the members of a shopkeeping class trying to better themselves in Victorian England.
July 21st, 1866. Very light breeze, got into Plymouth Sound 10:30. Went on shore to do business and returned about 4 o'clock.
The short stop in Plymouth provided an opportunity to finalise provisions before the voyage. The next stop was Auckland, about 13,000 nautical miles away and 3 months' sailing. Alfred writes about his first Sunday church service on board, whilst at anchor in Plymouth Sound.
July 22nd, 1866. Heard a very good sermon from the 8th chapter of Romans, verse 14, and some good singing.
As I'm a churchgoer who takes his church-going seriously, I find Alfred and Eliza's religious experience most interesting. It seems that Alfred and Eliza were observant Methodists or Wesleyans. The reading does not appear in the Anglican liturgy for that Sunday, and Alfred's closest friend in Auckland, George, was an active Methodist. Alfred's involvement with the Sunday services went beyond simply turning up. He actively supported the efforts by another member of the crew, the cook, to promote temperance. Now, temperance is not like teetotalism, which is a total ban on alcohol. Temperance is more about an attempt to moderate or regulate the usage of alcohol. So Alfred was a kind of Victorian activist, in a very mild sense, I suppose. One family relic that survives from this period is Alfred's library. It's populated by 19th century religious books. The books themselves don't appear to be valuable, and they tend mostly towards the kind of a romantic religious sentimentalism of Victorian England. It's the kind of second-rate literature that an aspiring lower middle-class family could afford. However, the library does speak of the value that Alfred and Eliza and their generation placed upon their Christian faith.
July 24th, 1866. Got under way 1 o'clock in the morning with a fine fair breeze, and Mr. E. and pilot left us just outside Breakwater Lights. We gave them 3 hearty cheers, and they returned it. As day advanced, the wind became lighter, and towards noon it fell almost to calm, and continued so through the night. Several vessels of every description in sight, and the happy shore of dear England just looming in the distance. Have taken my last farewell look at them for at least some time to come.
When Alfred stocked up at Plymouth, it was a serious business. For the next 3 months and 13,000 nautical miles, the ship and everyone on board had to be entirely self-sufficient. They needed to carry everything for every contingency, from sewing needles for repairing clothes to paper and pencils for writing letters and the continued education of the children on board. There would be no further opportunity to replenish their stores. So I wonder what it would have been like to be stuck on that tiny floating wooden island for 3 months with about 100 other souls. The challenge was not just the time and distance involved, it is what they sailed through. Everything from the windless, stifling heat of the tropics where the ship would lie motionless, to the snow and the storms of the southern oceans, dodging icebergs and manning the pumps. We'll come to those episodes later. That's all for this episode. Please like and subscribe. May God be with you in whatever journey you find yourself on, and I hope to see you next time.